2014 Toyota Sienna with some cracked lower control arm bushings. I'm going to show you how easy we can change those out. Hey, what's up YouTube? Dan the Fix-It Man. Got another quick video here for you. I'm going to show you how to replace your lower control arms and your lower ball joints in a 2014 Toyota Sienna. This will be the same for many other years as well. Now you can see that lower control arm bushing here at the rear is completely torn or broken away and cracked, and that's the reason that we're doing this. Because a lot of these lower control arms come with lower ball joints, and this vehicle does have over 200,000 miles, we're going to also replace the ball joint. It actually came with the lower control arm. You can buy them without, but ours came with it, so I'm going to go ahead and replace them. If you're not replacing the ball joint, you don't have to take the axle out. You can just disconnect the ball joint from the lower control arm. Now in our case, it is a little bit more involved because I have to loosen this axle nut and push that axle out. Otherwise, you wouldn't be able to get a torque wrench in there to torque the ball joint nut. So that's our only reason for taking the axle out. Now, one of the bolts that holds the lower control arm is blocked by this transmission mount. So we do have to take this off as well and lift up or support the transmission a little bit so that we can pull that out. I don't know if we'll be able to get this stud out or not, but that's the goal, so that we can pull this out and get to that bolt that holds the lower control arm in. Well, let's go ahead and get started. First thing I'm going to do is take out this 12mm bolt right here that holds our ABS and our brake line, just so that I can shift them out of the way and they don't end up getting pinched or anything. Now I need to take off this axle nut, and you're going to need a 30mm 12 point to do that. Now you can see that this is partially staked down a little bit. I don't usually worry about that, but I am reusing this axle obviously, so I want to protect the threads. In order to try to protect these threads a little bit, I'm going to try to pop up this flange here just a little bit with this little mini pry bar. Now you should have an impact socket for this. All I have is a 30mm 12 point chrome, and I've used it several times for this. I should have an impact socket for this, but I am wearing some safety glasses. But just don't do what I'm doing. Get yourself an impact version of this 30mm 12 point. There we go. Now hopefully this will push through once we get that ball joint loosened up, but I'm just going to spray some of this penetrating oil in here, some PB Blaster, and let that soak in for a minute. All right, I'm going to see if we can break this loose with a little tap here from the Tonya Harding and a long drift. Perfect. Not stuck, which is great. Now sometimes those do get stuck and you got to persuade them, but luckily this one is not stuck. It pushed right in. So let's go down underneath here and disconnect the lower ball joint so that we can pull this out, take out the axle, and move it out of the way so that we can take off the upper ball joint nut. Okay, now we can loosen and remove the two nuts and the one bolt that hold the ball joint to the lower control arm. Those are 17mm socket. Now I'm putting on this little pry tool that's going to help me push this lower control arm down. Just put a pry bar through there. And we're going to separate that ball joint from the lower control arm. Now we can just push the axle through, and we'll carefully set that out of the way. Now I'm just going to tie this axle up out of the way and kind of protect it as well with a bungee cord up here on the coil spring. So now we can take out that lower ball joint. All right, now we can take out the cotter pin here that locks this in place. All right, that cotter pin was just not cooperating, so I'm going to try to just impact this off. There we go. All right, now we need to separate the ball joint. You know, you can use a pickle fork or some other stuff, but I just like to use the Tonya Harding method here. Just strike it right here until that drops down. There we go. All right, now we're going to remove this transmission mount, and of course I'm going to support the transmission from below here in a minute, but I want to break this one loose first. And in order to do so, it looks like I've got to take off this little plastic splash shield, just a couple 10mm bolts and a little snap that holds that on. Now it's a 19 millimeter socket to take off this nut, but the goal is to take out the stud. So if I can't take the stud out here, once I get that lifted up, I might be able to get some locking pliers in there and loosen up that stud. Or I can take the nut from the other side and put it on here to lock that on, and that might help us reverse this stud. Let's go ahead and take a look first, see how it comes out. Sometimes these will come out with the stud. All right, looks like we're just getting the nut out without getting the stud with it. So let's go ahead and loosen the bottom ones here and try to lift that up and see if we can get enough space in between there to get some locking pliers and loosen that stud. Now down below we've got the 3 nuts that hold that transmission mount on. It's this one here, skip this hole, then this one here. There's usually a plastic cover here, but it's missing. And then this one here on the outside. And I'm using a 17 millimeter deep socket on these. All right, I'm going to take the nut all the way off. We're going to try getting in here first with some locking pliers, see if we can take that stud out. If not, we'll go to the other side and we'll borrow that nut and try to lock these together to back out the stud. Let's go ahead and lift that up slowly. We don't want to cause any stress on anything, but let's just see if we can slowly lift that up enough to get some space in between there. Let's see what happens here. You can almost just lift that up and over. Well, not quite. Okay, well, let's see if we can get in there with the locking plier method and give that a turn. Looks like our axle is kind of in the way. I'm going to drop that back down a little bit. There we go. We got it loose. All right, let me show you guys something here. You see this little nub right here? There's like a little locator piece right here that broke off. Just be mindful of that. I accidentally broke it off, but putting the other nut from the other side on here would have been better than the locking pliers. Even though we got it to work, you know, the consequence of snapping off that little locator stud, really not ideal, but still looks like we're gonna be able to make this work. Just gotta loosen that off till you can back it out the rest of the way by hand. And there it is. Now we should be able to pull this transmission mount out, like so. All right, and then we can take out the front bolt now that we can see it. That's a 22 millimeter socket I'm using here. All right, now this one here, again, another 22 millimeter. Now I noticed some people said that they needed to move the sway bar, but it looks like ours is going to come out no problem. Just like that. Now this back one here, we do need to prevent the top nut from spinning, so I'm going to put a 19 millimeter box end on there and 19 millimeter on the head of that bolt. There we go. All right, and then we can just pull out the old control arm. Sometimes these back bushings will be stuck in there. And there it is. We got the old one out. All right, we've got the old one here, and now we've got the new one right next to it. Just make sure that they look the same and everything does. The install is pretty much the reverse of the removal, but I am going to separate the ball joint here from the lower control arm so that we can do that and get everything torqued properly. Otherwise, if you had to put it in all as one piece, then this would kind of be in the way and you'd have to put the axle in when you're putting in that ball joint, and that really wouldn't allow you to torque that. So we are going to have to take this off. Just wanted to point out there is this piece right here, this little bracket or shim that goes on this side of the lower control arm. Just make sure that you do transfer that over to the new one. And then here's just a close-up of the old bushing so you can see how bad that was. Pretty much broken completely out and wasn't doing anything. You can see right there, definitely trash. And here's the new one. It looks really good. So I'm going to go ahead and separate the ball joint now, and we'll put this lower control arm back in. Now it's probably worth noting that the new ball joint nuts and bolt are 19 millimeter, not 17. Now the new ball joint does also come with a new castle nut. Just make sure that you remove this little plastic protective piece, and I'm going to set this back here just so we don't lose it, and we'll get a new cotter pin for that as well. All right, then we can put the new lower control arm in. Sometimes the side over here is a little tricky, but sometimes a little pry bar will help you get that lined up. There we go. Let's see if we can get this one started. I'm gonna get that nut started on the top. All right, and just slide that forward and see if we can get this one started. Now you want to make sure that you do get these into the threads before you put an impact or anything on there. Just make sure that they're all started and you're not cross-threading these. All right, now I'm just going to zip these on at a low setting on the impact just to get them snug. Now, a lot of people ask or have concerns about torquing suspension components before they're under compression or before the vehicle is sitting on the ground. Now, that's very true if the bolt were going through a rotational bushing or if the bolt was a part of the axis of that bushing. In this case, it doesn't matter at all if we tighten that under compression or not. Also, because the ball joint and the axle is disconnected, you can see that this lower control arm is a little bit higher. Now, you can see with the rear as well, it doesn't matter if you tighten it when it's down or when it's at full load or under compression. This is more of a flex bushing, not a rotational twisting bushing. So in this case, it doesn't actually matter. We can go ahead and tighten these or torque these to spec right now. All right, now we're going to torque this rear bolt here to 103 foot-pounds. We got the 19mm wrench up above. All right, now we can torque the front and middle bolts to 148 foot-pounds. All right, now we can put that transmission mount back in place. All right, now I'm going to go ahead and lower the jack back down. And then we can put that nut back on. All right, then we can torque this top transmission mounting bolt here on top of the stud to 65 foot-pounds. All right, now we can get all of these nuts down below started on the bottom of the transmission mount. Now we'll just snug these up real quick on a low setting. And then we can torque all of these to 50 foot-pounds. All right, we can put this little plastic shield back on. This was a snap and two little 10mm bolts. Just want to clean all the gunk off of this. Make sure that that's a clean surface for the new ball joint. All right, and then we can put in the new ball joint. Okay, it kind of helps pulling that ball joint down and then just slide it up into place. All right, now I'm just turning this so that the hole is kind of on the side. Otherwise, we'd have a hard time putting the cotter pin in it because it would be running into the back of this knuckle here. So I've just got it so the hole is just facing me right here. Let's go ahead and get this tightened down. Now don't worry, we'll be able to pivot that base here in a minute. Let's just go ahead and get this snug. See, we can just pivot that back around where we need it. But now I'm going to torque this to 91 foot-pounds. And hopefully we're lined up with one of the holes in the castle nut. Yeah, we're going to have to keep turning until we can line that up. You don't want to go backwards. You want to always just tighten it. All right, then we can just put that new cotter pin right through that hole. Okay, that looks good. All right, then we can put the axle back in now that that's tightened down. So I'm going to take off this little bungee cord that was holding that up. actually use the same tool again here to push that down and try to help us line this up. We'll get these started first. You know, I am going to use the pry bar trick here just to help me line up that bolt here so I don't cross thread that. I'm just going to go ahead and zip these on at a low setting. And then we can torque these two nuts and this bolt to 68 foot-pounds. All right, then we can put the ABS wire and the brake line here back on. All right, then we can put our axle nut back on. Just gonna make this snug first. All right, then I'm gonna use a big pry bar to hold this steady while we torque this axle nut to 217 foot-pounds. All right, then I'm just gonna grab a little punch here and stake down the flange to prevent that from backing off. Well, that's pretty much it on the driver's side. Just have to throw the wheel back on, but we're also gonna do the passenger side, so let's head over and take care of that now. Now the process is pretty much the same, but we have a motor mount on this side. It's actually a little bit easier to take off, so I'll show you how to do that. But let's start by taking off the brake line and ABS sensor here. Just so we don't put any strain or stress on those. Now let's try to undo the staking here on the axle nut. That seemed to work pretty well. Again, not something I usually do, but in this case, because I'm reusing the axles, I just want to keep these threads as protected as much as I can. Now it looks like this axle's been replaced because we've got a different nut on here. This is a 6-point and it's a 32 millimeter. This one I do have an impact socket. And hopefully that's not stuck. Perfect. Pushed in easily. All right, now we can take off these two nuts and this bolt right here to separate the ball joint from the lower control arm. There we go. All right, now I'm just gonna pull the axle out and we'll use that same method of tying this up out of the way with a bungee cord. Now, just like on the other side, we got to take off this plastic shield here. So I'm just going to push in on this snap here and pull it out like that. We can reuse that by pushing the center part back out. I didn't really show that on the other side. And then we've got two 10 millimeter bolts. We can pull this splash shield out of the way. All right, now we need to remove this motor mount so that we can access the bolts that hold the lower control arm in place. And in order to do that, there's 3 nuts from below. We can also take off these bolts that are up against the engine, and that's gonna allow us to free this and pull it straight up. I don't know for sure that we need to remove this top nut, but I'm gonna go ahead and do it anyway, because even then I think it might allow us a little bit more room to pivot that. Let's break this one loose first. It's a 19 millimeter. And we've got these bolts here on the engine. Those are a 14 millimeter. Another one over here. Now there's another bolt right here underneath. You can get to that with a ratchet. All right. There we go. All right, now we can loosen this motor mount from the subframe here. So we've got 3 17 millimeter bolts, this one right here, this one, and then this, not in this hole, but this hole right here. Here's this little plastic or rubber cap, kind of just came right out. I'm gonna use a 17 millimeter deep socket. Now I do have a jack with a piece of wood under the oil pan just to support the engine while I do this. So let's go ahead and take the rest of these out. All right, now I'm just gonna lift the jack a little bit to relieve the pressure on this bracket so that it'll come off the engine and we can take that mount out. All right, that looks good. We should be able to just pull this off. You see, I didn't necessarily need to take this top nut off, but that's okay. Let's just pull this off. and set it out of the way. You can see now we have access to take out this bolt here, which is otherwise covered by that mount. This is a 22mm socket. I'm going to use a deep socket here with the impact. See if we can zip that out. Got it. Same with this middle bolt here. Now we can loosen and remove this last bolt here. I'm going to put a 19mm wrench on the top to hold that while we impact the bottom out. There's the nut. And just pull that bolt out. And let's see if we can pull this out. There you go. All right, so here is the old compared to the new. And take a look at how bad this is. I just set it down and the bushing just popped right out. Definitely trash. Look at that. Completely broken out. Now it is very important that we take this piece off of the old one and shift it onto the new one. That's just a little spacer or bracket that has to be reused, so don't forget that. I'm also gonna take the new ball joint off of the new control arm so that we can get this on and torqued in place without having to fuss with the axle while we're doing this. All right, we'll see if we can get this one up in through here. That worked. See if we can get this bolt started through there. Right about there. All right, we got it. We'll get that nut started. Just snug that down a little bit. All right, and then we can try to line up these other ones here. Get these other bolts started by hand first. All right, and then we'll get these snugged down, just at a low setting, just to get them snug first. And then we can torque this back one here to 103 foot-pounds. All right, then we can go ahead and torque the other two bolts here for the lower control arm to 148 foot-pounds. And then we can put the motor mount back in. Just line up those holes and just let it drop right down into place. Now I'm going to start with the bolts on the engine here. Now I could drop it down a little bit, but I think I can just lift this up. Yeah, this looks like it'll work out just fine. Just going to get these all started by hand. And let's see if we can get that bottom one started. This one here, I have to use a ratchet. All right, we're gonna torque these motor mount bolts, the ones that are attached to the engine, to 40 foot-pounds. All right, now this nut that we didn't really need to take off, I'm gonna put that one back on. All right, now I do need to torque that, but first I'm gonna lower the engine so I have a little bit more room, and of course that will help us get these bolts all the way through so we can torque those as well. We can torque the top nut here for this motor mount bracket to 65 foot-pounds. Again, I didn't really need to take it off, but I did, so I'm gonna re-torque it. There we go. All right, and then we can start all of these nuts down below. Just gonna get these all snugged up with a low setting on the impact. And then we'll get these all torqued to 50 foot-pounds. This plastic piece has seen better days, but maybe it'll stay. Nope. So this is broken, so we're not gonna put it back in. The other side, it didn't even have it. All right, now we can put this little splash shield back in place. And this one plastic snap. All right, now I just realized I haven't even taken out the old ball joint, so let's do that now. I'm just pulling out the old cotter pin here. All right, now I'm gonna try to zip this off with the impact from above. That's a 19mm. There we go. All right, now we need to hit it right here to break the taper and drop this down. There we go. Then we just pull out the old ball joint All right, let's get this cleaned up a little bit. All right, then we can put the new ball joint in. Try to pull it down. That seems to be the ticket. Now you see the hole right here, so we'll be able to put that cotter pin in. So let's put our new castle nut on. Line that up, push the cotter pin and cut it off. Now we can take off the bungee cord here that was holding our axle up out of the way. Bring that back down, carefully line that up and push it on through. All right, using my knee to push down on the control arm. There it is. All right, and then we can just try to line up these bolts with the control arm. There we go. All right, once we get those lined up, we can just get this new hardware started. All right, now I'm just gonna snug these up on a low setting. Remember, the new hardware here is 19 millimeter, where the old stuff was 17. Now we can torque these lower nuts and the bolt from the ball joint mount to the lower control arm to 68 foot-pounds. All right, and then we can put the ABS sensor and the brake line hose back in place. All right, and then we can grab the axle nut and thread that back on. Now I'm just gonna snug this with the impact at a low setting. Now I'm just gonna put this big pry bar right here to keep this from spinning while I torque this axle nut to 217 foot-pounds. Now I'm going to use a punch and restake the flange here to prevent that from backing out. And we're done. That's all there is to it. Just make sure to get the wheel back on and torque to spec, and you should be good to go. Now, just a couple quick notes on this. Taking out that stud to be able to remove that transmission mount, it's a little tricky. I think the locking pliers trick will work, but you might try the double nut on the top so you don't have to worry about that little aluminum alignment nub breaking off. Also, just a quick note, I did not have to take off or remove the sway bar end link in order to push that to the side. We were able to get to those mounting bolts no problem at all. Maybe on some years you do have to disconnect the sway bar end link in order to move it, but we didn't have to pry it. I didn't have to do anything at all. It was not in the way. We were able to take those off. I hope you liked the video. Please give it a thumbs up and subscribe if you don't mind. That does help me out. And of course, I'll get links in the description to some of the parts and tools used in the video as well. Thanks so much for watching, and good luck.